Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 196, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Thursday, November 23rd, 2023. Happy Thanksgiving, coming to you not really live, but live on tape, we'll say, from beautiful Connecticut. Unfortunately, not super beautiful weather-wise at the moment. A little rainy, chilly, much colder than Charleston, but happy to be here. Thankfully, they haven't been hit by the super cold weather yet, so still some of that lovely fall foliage, if I could say it right, is still visible. And if it wasn't just for this kind of wet weather, it wouldn't be too bad, but a little chilly. But more importantly, happy to see my family and spend some time with them. Traveled on Tuesday, which is why there's a delay in the episode here. Instead of being on Wednesday, coming out today. Uh, Surprisingly, everything went super smoothly on Tuesday. I'm sure, Wednesday and the holiday itself going to be a little bit more hectic, but everything went well at the Charleston airport on my flight. Even my bag was the first one out at baggage claim. That never happens. So happy that everything has gone so smoothly. I got home on time. And everything's been great so far. Looking forward to eating a little bit later today with the family, relaxing and watching some football. I hope you all are having an amazing Thanksgiving or had a great holiday, depending on when you are listening to this. And I hope everyone is staying safe and having fun. I don't want to delay this too much, so we're going to get into the news. I don't have my normal board with me, so I don't have my earphones, so I actually don't really know how good the recording will come out. I'm sure Lindsay with LMC Sound System will do a great job editing, but it may sound a little different just because I don't have my normal equipment with me, which includes the sound effects. So maybe Lindsay will have access to them and adds them, but you'll have to imagine the whoosh in between each story if she does not, which is perfectly fine. We're making do when we're traveling. You got to do what you can. All I have is my mic, no fancy equipment. But without any further delay, let's get into the news. Real quick, as I'm recording this, a very fluid situation is still going on. I'm sure you've at least heard of it. So I figure I should touch on it. It could potentially become an even bigger story, but there's just really not a lot known at the moment. But multiple law enforcement sources have said that shortly before noon on Wednesday, which is when I'm recording this episode, a car coming from the Canadian side of the border with the United States exploded after it was heading towards a secondary search area. The car was on what's known as the Rainbow Bridge, which connects Canada to New York near the Niagara Falls region, and went through an initial checkpoint where identification documents are normally examined, but then shortly thereafter, the explosion occurred. Authorities do not know what caused the explosion, but the FBI, New York State Police, U.S. Customs, and Border Protection are on the scene investigating, as well as several Canadian authorities as well. Sources have said there's no serious injuries except to those who were in the car, which are reportedly are two men who have died. So a lot of information just not clear what exactly happened, if there's a motive, if any motive, if it's an accident. Certainly a lot of things to be worked out. By the time you're hearing this, we may know a lot more. But that's what's going on as I recorded this. Hopefully just an isolated incident, and thankfully reports are no one else was injured. But if there are already major developments, I'll be sure to talk about that on future podcasts. All right, moving locally, the big story, of course, is that Charleston has a new mayor, or at least a mayor elect, as of course he hasn't taken office yet. But former state representative William Cogswell has been elected mayor of Charleston. According to the South Carolina Election Commission results that were coming through on election night on Tuesday, Cogswell defeated the incumbent John Tecklenburg by earning 51% of the vote in that runoff election. So very close, 2 percentage points separated the two. I believe it ended up being less than 1,000 votes that separated them. So easily the closest mayoral election that I can remember since being in Charleston. It's notable that the incumbent was defeated, and also that Cogswell, although the mayoral elections are not partisan, everyone knows that Tecklenburg was, a Democrat for all intents and purposes, and Cogswell a Republican, as he served as one in the state house. He, again, based on records and some assumptions based on their politics and things they've said publicly, this will actually be the first Republican mayor in Charleston since the Reconstruction era. So certainly a historic result. Now, I've seen a lot of comments online from both sides, where a lot of people, who lean more liberal or, Democrats, some upset about this, worried about what a Republican may do, especially a Republican that, the Moms for Liberty group recommended in their group. And so they are expressing a lot of concern. Whereas on the other side, I see a lot of, people who lean conservative or Republican, celebrating, taunting, teasing people online that they know are more liberal or Democrat, saying like, ha ha ha, I guess Charleston's not as blue as you thought, or a Republican's going to fix the city, and, all these crazy, how things go online. Now, I will say I think both sides will be a little surprised, and this is just an assumption based on nothing more than what I've heard from Cogswell, what I've heard from people who know him, what I've seen in the news, as it relates to him. I think both people will be a little bit surprised. Now, inevitably, there's going to be something he does that angers one side or the other, and that's to be expected in politics no matter what. But I think that people worried that this is going to be some dramatic change uh, in either direction, I think are going to be either disappointed that it doesn't actually happen, or elated and relieved that it doesn't. Now, I say that because, yes, he campaigned as a moderate, and there are people who might point to different things that say, well, if you voted for this in the state house, he can't be a moderate. And I certainly get that. But there's a big difference between being a mayor and serving in a state house. They're obviously different jobs, although both in politics, but they have different purviews. And there's, his stance on certain issues, particularly cultural issues, really aren't going to carry much weight as a mayor. He may make a statement or something, but by and large, there's not a whole lot he can do when it comes to some of those things. So, I think the people thinking there's going to be some dramatic change, and the city's going to, install these, conservative policies, um, etc. It's just not going to happen. And the people afraid of that, same thing. So, a much more consequential election is one I'll talk about in a moment, um, because it involves city council and had much clearer lines drawn in the sand. It wasn't exactly clear what Cogswell thought about groups like Moms for Liberty. And again, in some ways, it doesn't matter because there's only so much as a mayor he can do. We saw John Tecklenburg come out at a press conference and kind of denounce them, and say they need to fix what's going on in the Charleston County School Board. And the other mayors, including him at that conference, made like a tiny threat, like if things don't change, there are some things we can do, um, to fix that situation. But really, there's not a whole lot unless things get really, really bad. So again, I don't think it's going to be that dramatic of a change that some people see. Now, of course, I could be completely wrong about that. you know, Campaigning is one thing, and we've seen that with politics across the board. People say and act a certain way to get elected. They change their tune from like a primary within their own party to the general election. They try to appeal to a bigger swath of people and then downplay, whether they're far left or far right. They try to come more to the middle to try to convince people like, oh no, I'm down the middle. I may be with one party, but I'm not an extremist and blah, blah, blah. So who knows? You just never know how things will change. But I believe that for those who are worried, Cogswell at this point deserves a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Again, I know there's some votes in his past that may upset some people one way or the other, but those votes, in some ways, don't really apply to him being a mayor because there's nothing he can really do about some of those issues as mayor. He could certainly do more if he was a state senator or representative again. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he is like as a mayor. Um, what changes he tries to implement, if they're good for the city, bad for the city. That's when you really know what someone is about when they've been elected, how they act when they are no longer, although it seems like reelection campaigning never ends. Um, but by and large, that's the time when you really know what a candidate actually is like, is when they are not actively campaigning and are trying to implement their vision, for whatever role they're in. So congratulations to Mayor-elect Cogswell. If he succeeds, Charleston succeeds, and I think regardless of what political party you're in, um, we all agree on that. If a city is doing, if a mayor is doing well, the city is probably doing well, and so on and so forth. So interested to see what happens from here. Um, Certainly not super upset about this. I have different preferences as my top choice when I was voting, but I don't think this is gloom and doom as some on the left may think it is, and I also don't think it's just dramatic change that some on the right think it is either. And I look forward to see what he does and working with him um, in the way that my blog has worked with any politicians, which is nothing dramatic, of course, but sharing news of the city, occasionally interacting with those folks. I interviewed Mayor Tecklenburg, have seen him at events to chit chat here and there, shared news of the city, etc. I look forward to none of that changing with a new mayor. I did the same with Mayor Riley, of course. Again, nothing dramatic. I'm not like heavily involved by any means, but just looking forward. Change can be good sometimes, even if, for those of you who liked Mayor Tecklenburg and thought he deserved another term, I'm sure there are things in the city that you still believe needed to be fixed, or some things you may have thought he didn't do well. And maybe this change will lead to some of those things actually happening. So we'll see what happens, but certainly a historic election. And, when he actually takes office, we'll see what that new look is going to be like, because there'll also be a little bit of a different look on city council as well, which is what we're going to talk about next. So William Tinkler defeated Mike Gastin in a November 21st runoff, same date as the mayoral election, and he will now serve on District 9, the seat for District 9 on the Charleston City Council. Now, this one I think is a little bit more consequential than the mayoral election, although they serve somewhat similarly, as far as what they do for the city. Unlike the mayoral election, where there was some confusion about, you know, what Cogswell or Tecklenburg may or may not believe in certain instances, especially with Cogswell when this whole Moms for Liberty accusations and things. There was no confusion with this race. Gaston was a supporter of Moms for Liberty, was vocal about that. There was no confusion there, and Tinkler was the opposite. So when there's an active, yes, I support this group, and yes, I believe in everything they believe in, which includes not just the stated mission statement that is entirely misleading, but also the unspoken parts, and someone who doesn't really talk about the group. Gaston was someone who was a supporter, and that was clear. So I think that election was a little bit more important for those who have a little bit more partisan view of politics. If you lean a certain way or are strong in a certain way, this was certainly a more clear-cut decision, and it was clear that District 9 rejected the whole Moms for Liberty support by Tinkler winning, not even in a close race. So like I said, I think this one was a little bit more consequential. Tinkler isn't the first in his family to join city council. His father, Paul Tinkler, held the District 9 seat from 1998 to 2007, so served for a long time. Now, of course, that always plays a part too, name recognition. If people in that district appreciated what his father did, that always helps as well. But regardless, a pretty clear-cut win over in District 9. And finally, a very interesting story. It'd be interesting on its own, but the tie-ins to the Murdoch case make it a little bit more interesting, even if it turns out there's no relation whatsoever to the two. So Jeff Hill, who is the son of Colleton County Clerk of Court Becky Hill, was arrested on Tuesday by South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, aka SLED, on charges related to listening to other people's telephone calls. This is all according to court records. Now, we'll get to Becky Hill again for those who may not remember who she is. But first, to her son, Jeff, SLED formally charged him with wiretapping. He ended up being released on Wednesday on a $20,000 personal recognizance bond. He is currently the technology director of the Colleton County government. So, that's another twist when someone in the government allegedly does something like this. This is big news. The charges have to do with his alleged repeated misuse of county equipment. A source familiar with the case said to the state newspaper, which is the predominant source I'm pulling this information from, although many other outlets have been covering it since this was announced. The arrest came after a long investigation, and apparently, one of the alleged victims in the case is a county official. So that adds yet another wrinkle to this case. There's not many other details that were available as of this recording. More will certainly come out. But I don't even believe when I was putting this show together, the actual details of the arrest were not immediately available. I think just a little bit ago the arrest warrant may have come out, but this has been a little bit of a delay as far as the announcement and when media actually first started reporting on it. So more details are likely to come out. Now, there's that. That's a big story in and of itself, even if, it's Colleton County. It doesn't necessarily affect us directly here in the Charleston area, but still a big story in the state. But the other tie-in, of course, is his mother, Becky Hill. For those who don't remember, she's the clerk of court in Colleton County, and she had a high-profile role in the Alex Murdaugh double murder trial, which, of course, not just here in South Carolina, but nationwide, and likely in some international markets as well, was a huge story. Uh, Now, Becky Hill, which the state described as an outgoing person, was a popular figure with the media and officials at the trial, but it was after the trial when she really got into the news. So, of course, trial ended back on March 3rd with Murdaugh being found guilty of the murders of his wife and one of his sons. After the trial ended, she published a book full of details of her interactions with the Murdaugh murder jury, court officials, law enforcement officers, and just the whole ordeal in general. That book is called Behind the Doors of Justice. Now, since that has come out, Murdaugh's lawyers have accused her in court documents of jury tampering, alleging that she influenced the jury behind the scenes to, in efforts to try to bring back a quick guilty verdict, so she could, according to them, publish her book with a nice, clear cut ending. The Attorney General's office has investigated those allegations and is contesting them in court. Hill, for her part, has denied the allegations in an affidavit. The Murdaugh lawyer team is trying to use this as a reason for a mistrial. So, of course, that's huge news down here as well, even though there has been no decision on that. So, that is that interesting tie-in. At the moment, there's not been any reported connection between Jeff Hill and his case and his mom's case. So whatever he was doing may be completely unrelated to the Murdaugh trial, and again, zero indication that it is related in any way, shape, or form. But it's still an interesting story that two members of a family are in court right now, or ostensibly they're not physically in court at the moment, of course, but are going through the process. So regardless, even if it turns out that there's no tie whatsoever to this, it's going to be an interesting story to see why exactly he was doing this, if it is true that he was wiretapping, what the end result was, what he was trying to do. And again, not just because of the alleged crime, but because he was a government official. That makes it even more of a story. So we'll certainly be keeping an eye on that. And with that, we will close out this Thanksgiving edition of Holy City Center Radio. I'm very thankful to all of you for listening. I truly appreciate it. It means a lot that people are interested in this podcast and anything I'm doing with Holy City Center. I really am grateful and so appreciate your support. An easy way to continue supporting the podcast is to subscribe to it. That way you also don't miss any episodes. And I also appreciate if you can rate it, like it, review it, whatever your podcast streaming platform allows you to do. Any of those kind of interactions help raise the profile a little bit and, may get the podcast over to someone else who hasn't subscribed yet. You can also support by going to patreon.com/holycitycenter, where you can sign up for one of those support tiers. All the money from that, and you can sign up for as little as $2 a month. There's no contract of any kind. You could do $2 for 1 month and cancel if you want to. But all those funds help go to things like the costs associated with running the site and a podcast, and so on and so forth. And if you've seen the recent updates to the site, some of that money is certainly gone to efforts like that. I am also very thankful for Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System, who always perfectly edits each and every episode of Holy City Center Radio, and especially thankful at this time of year when there's holidays and she's busy with her family and everything else, but still takes the time to sit down and make sure the podcast comes out and sounds great when it does. Also thankful for Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every episode. Always have enjoyed his music, and so grateful he's allowed me to use it on my podcast. With that, I will let you get back to Thanksgiving or whatever it is you're doing while listening. I hope you have or had a fantastic holiday. Stay safe out there. The plan is to record again and have an episode on Friday. As you know, with holidays and being with family and things, that may change, but that is the plan. So look for that episode tomorrow. Regardless, can't wait to speak to you all again. But until that time, good night and good luck.